Modernism, where at the turn of the century we have this marriage of the machine with the mind of man, marriage of science and art in order to accomplish a vision, and ultimately the fact that form follows function. Here we have a comparison of a pictorialist style photograph with a modernist style photograph. Modernism, especially in America, was really focused on the idea of form, that the way something has been created is the way that it determines the purpose of it actually existing. And so it's a celebration of life. It's the celebration of this masterpiece of the way that nature is formed, the way that we are able to see and understand things around us. It follows the Stieglitz philosophy of technical mastery to achieve a vision. Imagine the equivalence series, that the essence of the object photographed is the experience outside the object itself. It is meant to ignite memory and recognition, and in a way, to recognize a greater being. Another comparison of Stieglitz on the left and Paul Strand, one of his students, on the right, when photography went more modernist. It's a similar scene here. It's a city scene. It shows progress. It shows work. It shows the cityscape, buildings around it. But there's a much more apparent lyricism to Paul Strand's image, where there's almost a sense of a musical melody that goes with the repetition of the windows and the sort of haphazard notes of the people walking by. We see an influence from Cubist painting in another Paul Strand photograph, where the painters were breaking apart form while the photographers were celebrating form. But looking at the ways that these photographs and paintings were put together, they're speaking to one another. We have the exploration of motion at this time, a comparison with another Cubist painting, Marcel Duchamp, on the right, who is also the same person to do the fountain that we've discussed, where Duchamp and Stieglitz were in a conversation with one another. The photographer Edward Muybridge, showing a nude, the actual movement of a nude descending the stairs, where Duchamp, the painter in Europe, forcing those frames all together, layered on one another to come up with what looks like an abstract painting, but it's actually evaluating the movement of the figure through space and over time. The idea of form follows function, that the shape of an object should be based upon its intended function. Edward Weston, who is the sort of the pinnacle photographer at this time, who takes to heart this theory of form follows function, the beauty in the form, the way that it's engineered by some greater being in a sense, showing how modern buildings, this sort of progressive philosophy of how people are to live together in a small space, that the shape of a building should mimic the function of the building, the use of its materials, that steel and glass were a development of the Industrial Revolution, and so the properties of steel and glass should follow the way that it's shaped and formed, and that way is also following how that building is planned and designed and how it should function in society. Here we have Duchamp's The Fountain, which was the practical joke of artists making fun of photography. And Stieglitz got the joke. He understood that, okay, well, if you can take something out of context and place it somewhere else and call it art, then photography should be able to do the same thing. And hence we have the equivalence series from Stieglitz. However, Weston, we see, he kind of got lost in the joke. He also takes a photograph of the loo. However, he's now looking at the form of the toilet rather than the sort of absurdity of taking it out of place. Almost an inadvertent joke on a joke on a joke. Again, we have Weston, known for his lighting, and the style of lighting is it's a long exposure where the sunlight takes all day to light the pepper. And so this is actually a lot of technique employed by current commercial photographers. But here it enunciates or it emphasizes the form of the pepper, that it functions exactly how it should because of its form. He celebrates the form here. He's looking at it's biomorphic. It's also kind of transcends being a pepper and becomes something else. It's almost like a body part. It's very sensual in a way. It reminds us of the way that the human body is shaped and almost the texture of skin. So he's going beyond the actual object while also representing very accurately the object itself. Here we see Ansel Adams looking outward as well. Really, it's a connection again with this sense of greater being, that there's no way the man could comprehend coming up with a design so extravagant. Looking at modernist women in photography, Imogen Cunningham was actually a friend with all of these photographers. Edward Weston, Ansel Adams. She became a group with these men to form the F64 group, where it was the rules and the technique and the technical mastery of the camera and the chemistry were what dictated what kind of photographs these particular photographers did. However, she made Weston mad, and so she got essentially kicked out of the boys' club. She was no longer a favorite of theirs. She was bad-mouthed and therefore kicked out of history because she made Weston upset. However, we can see her being interrupted by Ansel Adams to show off his new camera. So they didn't particularly get along. However, their images are comparable. Some would argue that Imogen has stronger images than Weston, although she's kept out of history books. Tina Modotti, one of Weston's lovers, clearly influenced by Weston's technique, the celebration of the shape and form, but also motivated by politics. When she moves to Mexico with Weston, she becomes involved with the Mexican Revolution. And so taking the style of the modern technique, she uses the same ways of photographing objects. However, instead of some abstract experience of someone's lover or a more intuitive experience or reminiscence of a childhood memory, she uses that spark of recognition to ignite a political meaning to the image. And so now her images become symbolic. They become nationalistic. They become these symbols for these people to motivate change. And so she, in a way, combines the fine art technique with this social documentary. And so here we have a blurring of fine art with documentary, where the technique is beautiful and gorgeous and emphasizes form and follows that philosophy of form follows function. However, now she's really bringing into question the function of those objects.